Welcome everyone to Regional Transport meeting today, 28th of May 25. I'm chairing the meeting today. Arnie's got a new grandchild, so she's putting her energy into that at the moment, but she'll be with us online today. I'll start off with Karakia. Ngā mihi o te rā ki te whānau e hui hui nei kia tau te rangi Māori e kia whakatapua tātou me ngā mea e whakapono ana tātou haumi e, hui e, hai. So, no apologies today. Declarations of interest. No. Okay, so moving on to page 5, confirmation of non-confidential minutes from 5th of March 2025. Mover and seconder, no questions. Okay, moved by Rob, seconded by Councillor Gregory. Move on to all in favour?
Aye.
Against. Moving on to page 12, our action register. Item 10.0, Tinberry.
That's been completed and sent. Understand the letter.
Item 6.1.
Rhythm and Vines. We've reached out and we're still talking to Kotahi and we're still talking to Hawke's Bay. We've had no response yet from Rhythm and Vines, but sort of understand that we might get some response later in the year. In regard to the request, we think it's a very worthy cause, and for noting the budgets we're looking to support the safety stops that are requested by the council for the reasons I don't think the committee needs to debate about or anything. But, we're very supportive of that, and we're looking to provide that confidence to Kotahi to be able to progress with that on the budgets out of road safety action planning and community road safety funds. Nearer the date, we may get some relief from Rhythm and Vines themselves, but whether we do or not, we want to be able to commit to the Kotahi Council. And sort of understand that Rhythm and Vines is a sort of entity that whilst it has an interest in the space, we understand the radio silence at present. We think they'll come to us later in the year for some other assistance that might be an opportunity to help relieve us of some of that cost. We think it's very good money spent on something between $15,000 and $18,000, and that's achievable with some comfort in our zone, even though it's out of our region, but it affects people visiting us on probably the busiest road day we have any day of the year. Yeah. So that's our present position.
Any questions?
This one here has been transferred to Dave, hasn't it?
2 more items, they've been completed, 11.1,
Yes.
11.2.
Yes. Just in terms of item 11.2, removing the Fix-It app, so does that just get replaced with the Antenno app on there, so that people know to use that fantastic new app that we have access to?
Yes, eventually the IT Ready for me to put the logo on. So
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Our week plan today, we've got 3 information papers. We've got Q3 RLTP monitoring report, heavy vehicle route update, and NZTA Waka Kotahi regional update. No leave of absence, any acknowledgements and tributes today? Arnie's hand up. Arnie?
So, yeah, thanks, Teddy. Sorry, I was just going back to the action plan. Tim, can we have an update? It's there in the notes, but for the public record for people listening, just in terms of the Waipiro situation, the feedback, the follow-up meeting, etc.
Yes, the Waipiro, we understand we're having a meeting on the 5th in Waipiro, is that correct, Arnie? I believe 5th of next month we're going to have another follow-up meeting with the community.
That's good.
The repairs of the road are being endorsed through the iwi community funding, and it's gone to the Ngāti Porou board who are endorsing the works to reopen the Waipiro Communities Road, and that's being scoped and promoted now. There was a lot of other issues raised, not traffic related to flooding and that, which probably aren't to be addressed in this meeting, but that were related, that weren't roading related, like the flooding issue related, the flooding issue raised. We've got a report on that separates it from the roads causing the flooding, so probably not for this committee. And that's the update at present. If there's any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. So no, any acknowledgements or tributes today? No. Okay, so we've got one public deputation today from Reade Nikora. It's a regional liaison lead. And he's going to give us a 45-minute presentation on school transport and school transport assistance. Welcome, Reade. The floor's yours.
James Smith from Waka. I'm Group Manager of School Transport, and with me,
Reade Nikora, Regional Liaison Lead for Central Park School Transport.
I want to thank you for making such a generous amount of time for us to speak to you. Although what we do at the Ministry of Education and School Transport is not your core business, there is a very important level of interaction between our services and public transport services in the region. I also want to say on a personal note, I'm always very delighted to be up this way. My paternal grandparents were both teachers in Ruatoria for their careers, so a bit of a personal connection here as well. But we're here to talk a little bit about how school transport operates because of, as I say, this important interrelation, I guess, between what we do and what public transport does. So, do you want to run there? So, the Ministry of Education and School Transport Assistance. We talk about transport assistance as a broader term because what most people are familiar with is what we would call daily bus. Those are the school buses that run all over the country, as far out as the Chatham Islands, that convey students to and from their schools. But we actually deliver assistance in a number of other ways as well, which I'll come on to. but this is designed to assist students where distance or other factors may be a barrier to education. With some important provisos, we'll move on to the detail of how we operate. So, the Ministry of Education's transport services are funded through vote education. So unlike other transport services, obviously, that are co-funded through central government vote transport, as well as local share rates and fare box, we're 100% subsidised through the education grant. And we are restricted to what we can spend our money on, which is exclusively on eligible students, and I'll come to what conditions are set against what makes eligible students. With this, because our appropriation, as we call it, is 100% ring-fenced to the work we do, it is required that we spend it in line with our policy settings. And what that does for us is means that we tend to operate on a fairly straightforwardly rule-based function. Under the Public Finance Act, I don't have the discretion or the authority to spend outside of our policy settings. And we also don't have any capacity or any discretion to transfer our funding to other central government or local agencies. We have to spend it in the ways we have defined. So I mentioned that we have a range of types of service. There are our daily school bus services. I should add there are even a couple of ferries that we include in that roster. Then we have what we call technology buses, and they convey students from one school to another school that might be lacking in technology facilities to one that has a technology centre. And finally, we do something we call CESTA, which is assistance for specialised school transport. This is typically for ākonga with high or complex needs, mobility needs, and that usually takes the form of a mobility vehicle, something with a wheelchair hoist, for instance, or is often in something like a taxi or a sedan, something that meets the quite bespoke needs of individual students. On top of those vehicle services, we also have a range of funding arrangements. We do a sort of a bulk funding model that we call direct resourcing that we might give to a school or a network of schools. And that is set aside for those schools to make their own arrangements, noting that the money we hand over is equally constrained by the policy criteria that we have as well, so they are required to spend it in that way. There's a bit of a subset of our funding for Māori medium schools, kaupapa, a bulk funding model as well, but on a slightly different set of principles. And finally, we actually provide what we call conveyance allowance, where we have eligible students, but it's either impractical or not viable for various reasons to provide the vehicle service, so we will make a modest contribution to their own costs of getting to the schools. So if we look at a local area, you can see on the map where we operate. In Te Rāwhiti, 39 daily school bus routes, covering a reasonably extensive area, 1,700 odd kilometres, carrying around 1,200 students a day. So our task is quite large, particularly for regional, in comparison to regional public transport areas, and of course it's very focused on the rural, the more isolated areas. So to come then to those eligibility criteria that I mentioned, who can we spend our money on? We have three main criteria. There are a number of other operational policies as well that further constrain us, but the three main criteria are that students must be attending their closest state or state integrated school. Feel free, by the way, as we work through to ask questions. Happy to take questions at the end, but if anything's really grabbing you in the moment, please don't hesitate to put your hand up. So it must be, yeah.
Just two things. Can you just explain why, this previous slide, you said that the Kaupapa schools had a different criteria? You originally said that it was, the criteria was set and there was no, it's the same. Why is there a difference?
Okay, so the criteria that I was in the next slide are around eligible students. The way we fund Kura Kaupapa is slightly different from the way we fund non-Māori medium schools, and that is, well, the model firstly for direct resource schools, to work out what we would fund people, we do what we do with our normal route mapping, which is we would identify where all our eligible students are on a GIS system. We would then map out what we think are the kind of routes that would be the ones we would run if we were running daily bus services. And then on the basis of our current contract rates, we make a contribution based on those routes. Even though they're only notional, we don't then require the schools to run those routes. With Māori medium schools, there's a slightly, the geography makes it more challenging, because when we look for students to be going to their nearest school, one of the reasons that the model has been developed for Māori medium schools is you recognise that it's not simply the closest Māori medium school. If there's a kaupapa, if there's an iwi affiliation, that may actually determine that the closest appropriate school extends into a different catchment. It's getting very technical, sorry, but just to cover off the question. So instead of mapping routes, which would quite often not map to all of the students because of their distribution, we fund on a per cap basis. So we work out how many eligible students there are, and then we apply a rate which differentiates slightly for whether it's urban or rural, and then we provide the bulk fund on that basis. In either case, both of the bulk funding models allow the schools or the networks of schools to take the money that we've allocated based on this established funding principle and to apply it in the way that they see fit. Our only requirement is that the service or support they provide meets the needs of eligible students. A lot of schools find that they feel they can do things more efficiently, and they may also use some of the money to serve ineligible students. That's something we remain out of the discussion about, as long as we're assured that they're serving their eligible students. Does that make sense?
And secondly, the next slide around the distance from schools. This has always been a contentious thing where you've got a 5-year-old, years 1 to 8. The bus is coming along heading to the school, gets to 3.2 k's and drives past those students. I can never get my head around why that is, because there's a huge danger factor of kids. How are they supposed to get to school? So, yeah.
Okay. Happy to respond to that, and it may be maybe an appropriate moment to talk a little about the origin story, if you like, of school transport. So the school transport assistance that comes through the Ministry of Education, the provision of buses, that kind of transport assistance, dates all the way back just over 100 years to 1924. And this was a period, the 1920s, when there was a great deal of consolidation of a very dispersed school network out in the regions and the rural areas. And the Department of Education at the time had determined, for reasons of efficiency, sort of decisions we're very familiar with, that they would consolidate those schools into larger area schools. And at the time, the concern was that the effect of this, it was decided that it was a sensible thing to do from a schooling network management point of view, but there was a concern that really isolated kids would start missing out on school because they had good reason to stay at home on the farm, for instance. It was too far to get to the nearest school now because the the more convenient one had gone. And so the ministry started putting on buses to overcome that barrier. Now, at that time, that barrier was a material barrier because very few of those whānau in rural areas would have had a private car, for instance. A lot of kids would have had horses, but that's a different matter. So those distances, 3.2 and 4.8 kilometres, seem very specific to us now, but of course if we think back to the 20s, it's 2 and 3 miles. Right? So that's the origin. At the time that those criteria were set, you could imagine that the logic behind it would have been any kids of a certain age could jolly well walk. You know, they could make their own way on foot, that the state would support them. Now roll forward to the current times, and of course there are a lot of ways in which things have changed. On the one hand, most of those rural families will have private cars and so will not have that complete barrier to accessing their schools. But secondly, the roadsides that kids could have were considered that they could make their own way alongside are no longer safe for children to walk. And for that matter, if you think about 4.8 kilometres, even for senior students, probably not that many parents who would win the argument with their teenage child that they're going to walk 4.8 kilometres, if we're frank. But the criteria have simply remained unchanged for that 100-year period. And the reason why, and we can debate this at length, is probably in my, and this is my anecdotal estimation, is because actually what the criteria now do is give the Crown some limit on the fiscal risk they're exposed to through having a demand-driven service. So now what those criteria mean is simply that we know who is eligible and who is not, and we're not simply unlocking the box on a whole new cohort of students who are now going to be supported. So if and we've done a few modelling exercises that are out of date, so anything I say at the moment is very gestural and not to be relied upon. But if we were to look at what would happen to our demand, should we say it's no longer relevant to have any distance criteria, we might increase our demand by about 20 to 30%. Now, our annual appropriation that we spend across this whole system is currently sitting at about 260 million. So it's not monumental, but nor is it trivial amount. And a 20 to 30% uptick in demand would be a massive commitment for the government. Now, set that against the second question, which is there still really an insuperable barrier to parents meeting their obligation, which they have in law anyway, to get their children to school? And that would be the equation that would have to be considered. Suffice it to say that as a public servant, my job is to spend within the remit I'm given, and unless the policy changes, unless there's an agreement, then I don't have the flexibility to say, well, it now makes good sense to let these other children on the bus, and so we'll open the doors to them. Because while many people can point to buses that rattle past half full, and why couldn't you stop to pick up the kids, there's no cost implication. Across a whole system of 1,400 odd routes, that actually will be a commitment, and any commitment like that would absolutely have to be signed off through cabinet. So that's we've delved pretty deep into a particular point, but it's a question that gets raised frequently about our eligibility criteria. Are they currently or still fit for purpose? And I think that's a really good question, but it's important to clarify at the outset that a policy discussion is a separate thing from the kind of system that I've been given to administer. And if I'm directed to support the government of the day and advice on how we might change policy, then we'd absolutely do that and would have some views on that precisely along the lines that you put up. But until there's a readiness for a system-wide review, and you'll all know, because you all work in networks of some form or other, a networked system like this, it's very important to think through all of the potential consequences consequences of a change. So you can't just tweak one element of a network system, you have to think through the whole.
Well, can I just remind everyone, we're not here to debate or discuss anything. We're only to ask questions and clarification. Thanks.
Is there no flexibility on that 3.2 kilometres at all?
No.
Is that new? Because,
No, that's
years old.
100 years old.
no, because my kids used to catch the bus and they were not 3.2 kilometres, but they got on the bus and then the bus went right around there. So by the time they got to school, they'd gone 10 kilometres.
Right.
But if they went that way, they would have been less than 3.2 kilometres.
Well,
So
I guess,
there must be some flexibility.
no, we generally don't. So there are a lot of reasons why things operate outside of policy, and one of the main tasks that my team has is actually to always be reviewing our routes to make sure they are operating in policy. There could have been a range of things. Sometimes our operators make their own decisions on local routes about what they want to do. We do have them under contract and they are required to deliver according to the contract, but it's not unheard of that local variations are made. But so I couldn't speak to the specific situation about why that came about. Sometimes there are paid arrangements where before our route or after our route has been run, an operator might allow students on for if they pay. That's something that can happen. So I couldn't answer your question. Well, I can answer your question about whether there's flexibility. There's not, and this was recently tested in a case that went through the Ombudsman, where at the end of a really long discussion and a great deal of analysis, the Ombudsman noted that the only way we can administer a system of this way fairly is not to determine fairness at the level of the individual, because everyone has a compelling case about why it would be a good idea to pick up their children, but that fairness means that we apply our rules even-handedly across the multiple. So that's what we're trying to do. And that does mean that we end up being quite sticklers around, even a few metres. So,
I'll just take a question from Arnie and then just save questions till the end, or we're going to eventually run out of time. Arnie?
Teddy, thanks, Teddy. Thank you for your presentation. Oh, not even. Well, anyway, the question is about they're attending the closest state or state integrated school where they can enrol. Is that? I'm just thinking, does that take away choice from whānau about where they can send their kids? Like, they might not want to send their child to the closest state school, but the one over the way a little bit.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks for the question. No, it doesn't take choice away for the simple reason that, that parents exercise that choice all the time. What it does is makes it clear that the Ministry of Education funding is restricted to those who aren't going to exercise that choice. And the reason for that is tied up with transport as part of what we would consider a school network management tool. You're all familiar with the idea of the sort of, the vulgar term for it is often white flight or something like that. People don't like the nearest school and they want to go. But I make no judgment about why people make their perfectly valid choices. But from the point of view of the ministry trying to manage a large property estate, it is concerned to try and utilise its assets efficiently and effectively. So if we, and this happens quite commonly, right? You get a charismatic principal who's doing great things at a school and everyone wants to go there. The next thing, the ministry is being asked to provide funding for expansion of that school, more room in the classrooms, possibly at the expense of a nearest school, which diminishes, gets less funding as a result, and so on. So it's not a judgment in the sense that it is preventing that choice being exercised. It just doesn't see transport assistance being supplied to support that choice, if that makes sense. So, well, that's actually quite a useful opportunity then. We'll try and make some progress through the slides just so we get a as much information out as we can. But that's the rationale behind that criterion for attending the closest school. We've talked about the rationale for the distance criterion. And the third one, which is obviously of relevance, is that there is no public transport option available. And we use a very basic and very blunt-edged criterion there as well to identify which public transport we consider workable. So if a route is there which travels within 2.4 kilometres of the student's gate and the school, and it leaves after 7 a.m. and gets to school before bell time, and then similarly some time constraints at the after school end, then we consider it suitable. And to anticipate a natural and logical question that comes back about this, of course, just because a service meets those criteria doesn't mean, for instance, that capacity has been allowed if the ministry was to stop running the services. And that's absolutely true. No public transport operator, because they're also focused on efficiency and good use of their assets and so on, will supply capacity in advance of demand. So whenever we find that the criteria are meant that trigger our review of services in the area, we reach out to councils as part of why we're here talking today. We try to make sure that our that officers in councils who are making planning decisions are aware of what our criteria are and how they're likely to apply in the development of a local area's public transport network. And where possible, we work alongside our colleagues in councils to have a well-planned exit, if that's what we need to do as a result of the application of our criteria, to minimise disruption for students. So we want to make sure that if we do need to leave, that we understand that you will be having to go through your own planning, funding, applications and so on. We try and make sure that while we need to have an exit strategy where this is triggered, that we are working appropriately with planning staff so they know what's coming. So, similar to the question really about whether we're preventing students who we don't confer eligibility on from getting to school, the answer is no, naturally. We look after about 100,000 students out of a cohort of somewhere in excess of 800,000 students. So of the ones we support, there are the vast majority are actually finding other ways to get to school, either on public transport, which is a big one, or active modes. Ideally, that's a great outcome, but also by private car. There are some options that I've already hinted at that bus operators are allowed under their contracts to us to make private arrangements with parents of ineligible students. That's often done as a fair revenue gathering exercise for the bus operators. They agree a fare with whānau and so on. But there are obviously other possibilities as well: carpooling, public transport. All schools sometimes provision their own vans or buses, or have their own contracts with suppliers. So I talked a little bit about the context within which we operate and our obligations under, as public servants, basically subject to the Public Finance Act. The appropriations are established and the fund that the government gives across through the particular vote, in this case vote education, is very carefully ring-fenced by those criteria that I've put up. So in a network like ours, given that our eligible student base is quite mobile, students finish up their schooling and families move on and people leave the valley and or developments are built somewhere new, the location and number of our eligible students changes over time, and so it's a kind of a continuous routine work of my regional team, which Reade is part of, to work around the country and reassess those our existing routes for whether they are delivering according to our policy. And that's the assurance I have to be able to report on to government to say that we never have 100% certainty that we're only delivering to eligible students and not ineligible students, and nor do we have 100% certainty that we've reached all our eligible students. But that's our ongoing work to do that. So we regularly review those routes on a nationwide program. We undertake patronage audits because there are a whole lot of sub-criteria we also apply. If there are fewer than 8 students, for instance, on a route, we discontinue the bus because the cost per cap has usually, as a result of that, gone up very high. And sometimes schools request reviews because they know from the ground that where we're sending our buses, not necessarily where their student base is currently. So we try and respond to those promptly as well. Public transport, the provision of regional public transport, we consider all of those, we contribute to regional public transport planning documents, both in a general sentiment that we look forward to and try to operate closely with our colleagues, but also at a more specific level, we want to work collaboratively. So that involves us reaching out to people who we know are undertaking public transport planning. We watch PTPs to see where there are revisions to plans coming, and we try and get ahead of potential changes to make sure everyone's got as much sort of awareness of what we're likely to do in response as early on as possible. So one of the challenges with talking to councils, and I consider this the same sort of situation, is it can sound very much like we are defending a territory. I certainly hope we're not presenting a defensive face, but what I am trying to be clear about is that the way we operate, we're not consultative because our policy criteria are fixed. We're not going to communities and asking how they feel about likely changes. I think, we get told very clearly from communities what they think anyway, but it doesn't feed into our decision-making process. And I think it's really important to be frank about that, because the goal is to make sure, firstly, from an educational point of view, that there are good options available to Konga, and from a general New Zealand public transport system, make sure that there's good coverage as well. Now, we typically operate, and we're designed to operate in those most isolated spaces where demand had not led public transport to expand. But at the same time, it was always envisaged that we would retreat as that demand grew. Now, the only challenge there is we've never had any decisive overarching legislation that tells us how to operate together. We've got our marching orders, and we try and operate according to the rules we're given, but the best we can do, I think, is to work collaboratively and make sure that public transport authorities also understand how we're operating, and with the understood shared goal of providing a collective good coverage across the country, developing lifelong users of public transport. We recognise real benefit in school-age children starting on public transport. We know from studies that you get a vastly higher use of public transport in adulthood among the cohort of people who used it as children, and that there are a whole lot of co-benefits. Now, these are not benefits that are written into our into the rationale for why we're running the services, so those benefits around emissions, student safety, congestion and so on, but we recognise that it's beneficial nevertheless. So this is really part of an invitation to continue working collaboratively, to raise any questions that you might have, to raise any concerns that you might have early on. It's a commitment from us to be available to answer those questions, and where appropriate to send regional staff out to talk with you or with your officers about what's going on the ground. I think we do have, and we have, I'll roll back a bit, obviously there are different public transport authorities all around the country. We're one big operation that operates everywhere. So what that means is we maintain relationships with a wide range of public transport authorities, from some very big ones to some very small ones. In all cases, we're looking to work productively together, but what matters to you may be different. For instance, when we're engaging with Auckland Transport or Greater Wellington Regional Council, or even a completely different regional authority as well. So we're looking for that opportunity to have those conversations, become attuned to what your particular concerns are or what your questions are, to see if we can answer those. A hand up, but yeah, happy to take questions or field any observations.
Start off with Arnie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. I understand the criteria is 100 years old and probably up for review soon. When it does come up for review, can consideration be given to preschool children? I know I live up in Wharekahika, the top end of the coast. I'm currently at Tauwharepārai Road, 34 k's up. And one of the issues for parents who live in rurally isolated spaces like this is they might have school-age children and preschool children who need to get to around about the same place to go to preschool or to school, but there's no provision for preschoolers to be able to get on the school buses. Is that something that can be looked at in the future?
Look, certainly. So regarding policy review generally, that is something that would be commissioned by the Minister of Education typically, or the government of the day. They can call on that and ask us to support that work. If the direction is to do a kind of a blank slate, ground up review of how the whole system works, say they said, well, it's 100 years old, surely we need to start from square one, do we need the service? All of those things, these questions would naturally, I think, be included, and it's certainly the case that we don't currently cover any early childhood, and we don't cover any post-secondary support either. So those kind of questions could absolutely be raised. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other?
Yeah, just the comment you made was that this is 100-year-old legislation almost and hasn't really changed. The one difference that we're facing now is that we've got, especially in an area like this, is that we've got if you're 3 kilometres from a town and school, normally you've got a footpath or a designated cycleway through the reserve or something. But in the country you haven't, and putting kids on road now compared to what it used to be, especially our area, we've got a huge increase in heavy traffic along the road. So the safety aspect of it is monitored. He did mention also that parents can negotiate with the bus operator if their kid is closer, if there is capacity on the bus to actually pay, which is a great thing, because it'll always be cheaper than running your own vehicle.
Of course. I think, so what we've seen over time is that our operators, because it's a provision that allows them to do that, so we can't ask them to do it or even direct them to consider it. So normally they would only mobilise if a group of parents or a number of students, they'd be very unlikely to make provision for a single student to jump on a bus. But I don't want to speak on their behalf. The question can be asked, and the important thing is for parents to know that there is provision under our contracts as long as it doesn't in any way inconvenience or diminish the service for our eligible students, which is why we're paying for the bus in the first place. What we have seen is a really significant move away by the bus operators. We've ended up with more and more large operators dominating the market, which is fairly common. And again, I'm being a bit speculative here, but I think what's happened for them is that they found that where they did get involved in local arrangements, if they ever needed to change, say for instance, we said, well, we now need the route to go somewhere else, they found they were getting engaged in the kind of engagements we have with local communities, and that I think they just found it too hard, to be honest. So that's not to predetermine the outcome of a discussion that any community can raise with an operator and say, hey, how about what we call parent-paid extension before the school run starts or after the school run finishes. Some may be open to that. On your comment about the safety, yes, completely understand that the conditions, alongside rural roads have changed. And this becomes, I think the first thing is to say that without the policy change, it's important. People often ask me about, what is my commitment to safety? And my answer has to be, the part of the system that I can assure or attempt to assure safety over is the part that I control. And so I think it's really important that I'm very clear that my responsibility starts with the pickup and ends with the drop-off. Because people often say, well, you're making my child walk alongside an unsafe road. My answer is a very categorical no. Parents know if that's safe. I'm being clear that I can't assure safety for that last part of the journey, the first mile, last mile. So if parents consider it unsafe, then they need to make arrangements if that's dropping off in a private car or whatever. It's not, I'm really clear, I don't see this as an abrogation of my responsibility, quite the reverse. I think if you want a safe system, everybody involved in that system has to be crystal clear on who owns what part of it. If parents are under the misapprehension that I'm looking after their child after drop-off, that's where unsafety, I think, creeps in.
Any other questions?
Probably just, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Quick little wrap up, I suppose, and a bit of summary in relation to how that is specific for Gisborne. So we're really aware that you guys, through your RPTP, are looking at establishing your new public transport routes throughout the city and throughout the region. As part of that, there will be some work that we will undertake after 1 July, once your arrangements have been confirmed about what that does mean for our ministry school bus services and whether or not there is any impact that would come to light with any public transport changes. We're not necessarily aware of what is in the plans at the moment, but of course, as James said, really happy to extend I suppose an invitation for a conversation around if there would be any impact in the first instance before any decisions are made, or to give you a bit of a heads up around what that might look like in terms of an application of a policy from us. It shouldn't deter you from making the decisions that you want to make to benefit your whole community, but at least you'll be well informed then around the potential impact on the school students specifically. It's not necessarily, a thing that you guys have to take up, but just want to mention that absolutely we're always here to have a conversation with officers and to put some 2 cents forward from our perspective.
Thanks for your time today, James. Reade, it would have been hard to get that out in a 10-minute slot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll just do one more paper and we'll break for afternoon tea.
A long time, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, looking pretty good. 10 minutes for this paper. So, no extraordinary business, no notices of motion in business. So moving on to our first report, page 15. Quarter 3 Regional Land Transport Plan Progress Update. Tina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll introduce Tina, who's actually going to run you through the paper which provides an update on progress against the Regional Land Transport Plan program works and performance measures against our planned activities and expenditures under the plan from 1 January to 31 March. Over to you. Thanks. Great report. Thank you. So it's our RLTP monitoring report for quarter 3, year 1. We're monitoring the progress against strategic objectives in the RLTP and our targets and measures that are there. So that includes community resilience and asset management, safety, system safety, transport choice and inclusive access. So there's some tables and links to other reports for more detail on recovery, operations and infrastructure updates. There's a bit there about speed reversals that are mandated. I've just added that risk register about safety this time because we've sort of got limited safety funding and no one to promote some of that information, which is a bit damning for this region. And then, a piece about investment planning that we're doing around the network resilience case, which we have a draft due on the 11th of June in time for the next council meeting on the 26th of June there, final draft. So that's chugging along and hoping to be peer reviewed and go to NZTA and get final sign off in August. So there's also a bit about further reports that we're looking at around freight data. So that's that transport modelling and interregional and connectivity piece that we've got with with Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And and I also brought up the quarterly ministerial reporting that we've started to do. So we've had a couple of those about TTM and potholes, and a bit of information in there just dropped in about heavy vehicles and traffic counts. And any questions?
Thanks for that. Thanks for the report. Any questions?
Sorry, I'm a bit deaf, but was this was the 43 Regional Land Transport Update, Progress Update?
Yes, I think so.
And an attached document.
Yeah, okay. So just looking at those statistics on what they call them, deaths and deaths and severe injury, and we feature quite well in those statistics, and in particular in
Poorly.
well, yes, poorly. We're high on the list. And two areas that we are outstanding in is speed, accidents caused by speed according to conditions, and open road loss of control and head-on. Now, with these speed and conditions, is there a breakdown about how road conditions, not necessarily weather or sunstrike, about the actual road condition, i.e. lack of maintenance, and how it might contribute to an accident? So that's the first question. Is that differentiated? And then if we had that figure, we could put a dollar amount on what poor maintenance is actually costing us in the way of lives and injuries. And would this encourage central government to help fund us with some more money to help fix our dilapidated roads?
I'm not sure if there's a question in there and who it's to.
Oh, sorry, you were looking for a question.
Question I've got myself, so yeah.
Okay, so there was the first part of the question, are road conditions,
Not,
as in maintenance,
not that I've seen
needed?
done, no. I don't know, well, I haven't seen that data. If it is there, it'd be interesting to know about. It's part of that sort of, we would like to do modelling to delve more into that detail. CAS holds all crash data, and there's a lot of data there, and figuring it out is quite a technical job, and there's also a lot of privacy issues as well. You can know quite a lot about a crash, and you be careful about that. And, yeah.
For death or serious injury, it will be contained within a police report. Unless it's deemed to be due to drug, alcohol impairment, there's usually a variety of factors. Just to pinpoint one area is very challenging when it comes to that. Also noting as well the privacy requirements. If it's then subject to a further review, it will go to the coroner. So there is some public data available, but it's not as easy to strip it down to say there was loose gravel or the ultimate cause of a death or serious injury.
It'd be interesting to see what a statistician could do with those figures, in that we're quite good in some areas, like young drivers and intersections, etc., etc. It's just those two areas we outstrip everybody. And those, coincidentally, would be exacerbated with bad road conditions.
I wouldn't be in a position to make that leap, to be honest. And with regards to the latter part of the earlier corridor, whether or not it would influence investment from central government would be a question to the Minister for the GPS, as opposed to an operational decision by NZTA.
How could I present that as a hypothesis?
I'd probably seek advice from officers and how you would want to present that to the Minister.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have a couple of, one point for clarification and then just a couple of comments on the speed limit section. I was going to wait till my presentation, but it's quite nicely captured here. Just on point 15 on page 19, the speed limit has to be returned by 1 July. It won't be changed on 1 July. So that's the date set in the setting of speed limits rule. And we're just waiting for the date of it being returned to the previous speed to be confirmed. It will likely be at some point in June. And just with regard to the information in sections 16 and 17, just to make it really, really clear, the setting of speed limits rule 2024 is very explicit in what can and can't happen, and that is based on the classification of the road. It's not an interpretation by central government or by NZTA, it's by how the roads are classified. And so when we're thinking that there's an amount of contradiction, it's actually quite specific. I think maybe it's whether we agree with the specificity that's contained within the rule and also how that road is classified. And just lastly as well, the results of the 2 sections that went out for consultation, we're expecting those to come out in June. And the consultation process for those 2 sections were quite different to the auto-reversal sections, in that it did take into account, or it will take into account, both community and road user sentiment, but as well will take into account other factors like development, the environment, and the crash history on that section of the road as well. So it's probably more what you would call a fulsome or traditional consultation process versus what we were required to do for those that are reversing. So just to clarify. Thank you.
No more questions. Yeah, well, there's got a few questions. We were talking about the safety education, and it's now at a national level. So we used to be able to specific our advertising for the issues in this community do we have any input in that now, or could be advertising that doesn't really, like for example, we're looking good for young drivers, so that's something we probably wouldn't be targeting. Do we have any input in what is promoted in terms of advertising nationally for road safety?
You'll be aware that it's been very specific in the GPS as to the approach for the road safety advertising, and that there was the desire in setting the GPS for consistency nationally, and that was primarily in line with the police enforcement areas of restraints, impairment, distraction and speeding. So you will have seen that there's the targeted campaign, for example, about drug driving that's out currently. And we will continue to follow that on a national basis as is prescribed through the GPS. For the amount of monies that you do have available, you're at your own discretion to use them as appropriate, but there are limitations on what you can do in terms of the advertising side of it.
Thank you. In terms of the data, on page 24, it says it's from 2019 to 2023, so it's quite historic data, and it's a 5-year period. Do we know if we're heading in the right direction, or do they vary? Like you could get a single accident which could involve a lot of people, which could dramatically sort of influence those results. Do we know if that's fairly consistent crash data, or does it change every 5 years?
Like a rolling average, I think it keeps.
So it'll go from 2020 to 2024 next, or will it be another block of 23 to? Oh, so every year
Every year you get a rolling average.
Okay, thank you for that. And do you find there's any correlation between demographics of a community and those stats?
No question for me.
No.
It's a research report.
Thank you for that. No more questions? Mover and Councillor Gregory, seconder. Seconded by Councillor Telfer. And we'll break for a 10-minute. All in favour?
Aye.
Carried. And we'll break for a 10-minute. Moving on to page 50, heavy vehicle route update. So we're just going to get a update on our preferred heavy vehicle route for our Tairāwhiti region network. Presenting on that.
I won't. Sorry, but yeah, basically 5 years ago, council consulted on and approved a state highway route for heavy vehicles, but relies on NZTA's implementation of some corridor improvements which have been in limbo, awaiting more info from us. So we've got transport modelling proposed in the RLTP, but it's only got probable funding, and we are still working on how to progress this. Meanwhile, we're changing permit maps to allow us to monitor the change over time. Prioritisation on NZTA's improvement program is pretty much sought. So, in the body of this report, we've got some background. Some great data that's pretty old now, 2017, that we're looking to improve, hopefully. We've got some modern REAM data on traffic counts and heavy vehicle usage, which seems to align with court reports. And yeah, some damage to Ormond Road, just to sort of show you what kind of damage is happening to local roads in the interim. So yeah, and in the background, Port was approved, signalling growth I've got a preferred route maps there for you, some of the information about everything of heavy vehicles that's going on, and basically a timeline, which is a bit of an info doc of everything that's happened since in the last 5 years, around rail shipping going on in the background. Great. So the discussion option, it's all about building a case, by the way, for NZTA to fund improvement. The discussion option talks about how the parking and traffic bylaw is all set up to enact the route when it's ready, when the corridor's ready. Yeah, talks about the safety interventions that are needed, the modelling and freight studies that we've talked about, the resilience case again, yeah, all that sort of information, the gathering that we're doing, and also sort of show some of the budgets for fixing rail and operating shipping and that we've found through the recoveries in the resilience case, some of the money that's being put into roads. So yeah, it's casting a wide net for assessing multimodal options. And our next steps for this report is basically to keep trying to get that transport modelling done, interregional connectivity with Hawke's Bay, about our multimodal options. And we've been connecting as a group of regional councils for the Lower North Island better freight data advocacy that I'll probably present a paper on at the next RTC. Just more information about getting better data nationally. Like freight, like I say, that 2017 report's getting pretty old. South Island's doing stuff together to get better freight information, and the Golden Triangle, sort of north of the north, are working together. So yeah, there's 5 of us councils sort of chipping away in the background on a sort of case for change, and some options there, but I'll have nice slides and everything for you next time.
Thank you. Thank you for that summary. Any questions? Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. First of all, when I saw this, I was really excited because I thought it was a solution for getting rid of traffic off Ormond Road, maybe, and I guess it is in a way. However, just generally about that concept relating to all of the pages in the on the topic is that because in the TRMP at the moment we're looking at the Aupuni plans, and that if the trucks were not going to go down Ormond Road, obviously they're going to go down Aupuni Road, and I was just wondering if that is, you know, we're thinking about this, are we considering that in the TRMP options, that there will be increased heavy traffic along in that area. And also, that's my first question, and also on page 59, when we talk about rail and the Blue Highway, that's also quite exciting because it seems, you know, if you read that, you'd think, well, you should fix the rail without a doubt. It's a much more financially viable option. And then the Blue Highway, it paints that to look quite good too, and it's had a 2.75 million subsidy in the aftermath of the cyclone. But also in the background, we've got the only product that's coming down the coast is logs, And when we look at what's happening with that situation overall, you know, not just within this silo, but over the whole of council and the transition of land and everything, it's not really an option at all. So that's my comment on that, but I just, if I could have an answer to the, whether or not we're considering this within the TRMP as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gregory. It's a really great question, and the answer is those considerations, as well as you know, with the urban plan change piece that's going on, alongside is the future development strategy implementation, which includes the master planning for various areas within the construct township. And so part of that is actually incorporating the regional land transport plan and findings from quarterly meetings across this forum is taken into consideration. And I'm just wondering, Tina, if there's anything else that you'd like to add in that
Just
regard?
that we've got meetings coming up with your team and unis. But yeah, it's something pretty soon, like everything's
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, just again to take your really valid comment around the second piece in the railway.
Councillor Telfer.
Yeah, just on page 54, just regarding the Twin Perth expansion, back when that was looked at and done, which was 2022, which was like 3 years ago.
Yep.
Stated there that the Reade Street intersection was basically put on hold while NZTA was waiting for council's network operation to be completed. Has that been completed? Because if it has, have these negotiations around Reade Street started again or not? That's a long time ago. That's why it was actually held up then, which is now 3 years ago. The reason says that they're waiting on the council's network operation plan. So, you want to tell me if that's been completed and where to from here? Because that is one of our biggest, problems with traffic down in that area.
Yeah, so that's kind of evolved into this transport model that we've been asking for now. So its name was that at that time, like say 2022, but a few things have sort of evolved from that. We had the framework that we did, but there's also been one network framework that came out and a few other bits and pieces. Obviously the FDS, a whole lot of sort of design work and and so it was agreed with the NZTA that we should embark on getting this transport model to progress this, and I guess it's all going to be called a knot at the end, but I don't know if that's still the current naming that we'll go for. It's sort of evolved a bit.
It just seems to me that's a very, very long time to actually be doing some plan and then develop another plan, the name gets changed. When are we going to see this happen?
Just 100%, your officer's advice is right. We do need the further data and modelling to add any strategic weight to investment into that intersection. So it was in the NLTP and did not get prioritised for funding, you'll remember, in this 24-27 NLTP. So we do have to make a wider and more strategic case from a development perspective, freight efficiency perspective, and the work that your officers are undertaking are critical to do that. And it is really important that it is at a wider system level and not just trying to treat one intersection. The other complication with that intersection is that it's actually quite well self-policed. So the data that's currently available for it doesn't show the kind of problems that you all day-to-day believe exist in there, which is another aspect that the modelling work that your officers are doing is critical to actually highlighting and showing that alongside the future development plans for the port and their aspirations as well. So it might seem like a long time, but at the minute it's not been successful in securing funding because you don't have the strategic case or the data and modelling to back up that investment and to get it higher up the prioritisation chain, essentially. Is there any other comments you'd want to make on that?
No,
So not in the near future then.
Make a really great case and you never know.
Ani,
Thank you, Teddy. Thanks for the report. Like Debbie, I was excited when I saw the rail. I love rail. And also take your point about the pieces of the jigsaw all needing to be in the same frame to get an overall picture of how everything fits together. And my question is in relation to the twin berth, and should it even be discussed or part of the planning given Ngāti Oneone's stance? And have they been, will Ngāti Oneone be, I'm assuming they were consulted in the first round when the resource consent was approved in 20, but that is some time ago. Things have changed and shifted, and so what would the process be going forward for that? Regards to the relationship with Ngāti Oneone and their position currently, or well, they've made their stance quite clear around any more land and port is a bone of contention.
Probably not in a position to talk about that in this meeting, I'm guessing. Take those discussions.
We did note it, that it's something that needs to, I just don't want it lost because it's a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of whether or not the twin berth goes ahead or not.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely note it. I think these are discussions we probably should have offline. No comments? Any other questions? We have a mover.
I'll move it.
Moved by Councillor Gregory, seconded by Councillor Telfer. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you.
I think it's just introducing Linda, isn't it?
Moving on to our last paper, NZTA Waka Kotahi regional update. Linda's presenting this. Page 63.
Keep it short and snappy. Thank you very much. Usual format, we'll just run through a few of the national strategic slides and then get into some of the more regional and local progress. I think we've largely covered this through the RLTP paper, but just wanted to say thank you to your officers for getting through, they met the deadline on getting through the supplying the list of specified roads as required. So thank you for your work to achieve that, and that's well noted in your paper. Just as well, it doesn't apply to your local roads as noted in your paper. 1 July is the deadline for all reversals right across the network, and then 1 July 2026 for the variable speed limits outside schools. And just reconfirming as well We're expecting the outcomes of the 2 sections that went out for consultation on 35 to be back hopefully in June, so we can update you, because I know there was a lot of community interest in that. Back to public transport, but not school buses. Just a very brief update on the national ticketing solutions. So you'll be aware you're part of the regional consortium that we're working with on this, alongside the larger metropolitan PTAs. And this is the move to having one system right across the public transport network. There's a couple of exceptions on ferries and things. But by and large, to tap on and off either with your debit or credit card or with your Motu-Move card. The pilot's continuing well down in Christchurch between the CBD and the airport. There are a few refinements required on the IT system, mainly because of the complexity of the public transport system right across the country, and that every PTA does it differently in their fares and schedules and systems. So what looked like quite a small scale system, a small scale network, is actually quite complex when it's brought into an IT parameter. So we're just working that through. So you're well involved as a PTA through that regional consortium, but we're just waiting to reconfirm the timeline as to when you'll progress into Motu-Move. Anything with IT is never straightforward though, is it, team? My goodness. Just an update on the emergency works, 2 parts to this. So you're aware, and your council put in a fulsome submission that the board was considering reviewing our emergency works policy. They did make some changes to some of the technical aspects, and then sought further information on the qualifying events and the FAR subsidy for emergency works. The board have made the decision to retain through this NLTP the existing trigger event as well as the existing emergency works FAR rates for that. So there's no change in this NLTP period. We will have to look at it in a future NLTP period, but you've got a bit of breathing room should another event happen. Also as well, just want to note that in Budget 2025, if you didn't hear the announcement, because there was quite a lot in this budget about a whole range of other things than transport, but those regions that were impacted by the North Island weather event did secure additional funding to see through the rest of your recovery programme through to end of June 2029. And at the same time, we were able to confirm that you have your bespoke FAR rates confirmed through to there too. So that will give you good continuity from a planning perspective, as well as entering into your contracts with your contractors for that work. So good news from the budget for you. Just a wee update on Road Safety Week. Topical discussion earlier. This is something everybody participates in on an annual basis. There was a really strong focus this time on vulnerable road users. That was actually a theme of the United Nations Global Road Safety Campaign this year. And this just encourages everybody to be a road safety hero. We do a lot of work with schools, with fire and emergency right across the country. We had over 1,200 different organisations involved in the week. And it's a great way, especially to get the youth involved in just taking a little bit of extra care and caution when they're out on the network, and bring it to everybody's attention. And then maintenance nationally, we've had a significant, let's say, spring, summer, and into early autumn, because the weather has been quite kind this season. Right across the whole country, we've delivered over 2,000 lane kilometres of renewals, so that includes full road rehabilitation as well. We're already beginning to see this pay dividends, particularly in terms of the overall experience, but how the network is beginning to perform as we head into winter. You'll have seen as well that we've used quite different approaches to this year, particularly through the Waikato and on State Highway 1 and closing very large sections, getting in, doing the job once very well and getting out again. Period of disruption, but much safer for both the road workers as well as road users, and allows us to deploy quite a different way of working when the network's fully shut while we do it, as opposed to trying to keep one lane open. We're also as well, just, you know, as you head into the wetter months, and I'll jump onto what's happening on your network, we've still got a lot of work on drainage, for example, but this is the time we do a lot of the cyclic maintenance, so checking in on the signs, rubbish, but particularly line markings as well. So over here, this was the progress for your network right across Tairāwhiti. So you'll see there that the rebuild, reseals, and also the rumble strips, the bumpy ones, they're all fully complete right across your network. And we've been making very good progress on the drainage. There's still a little way to go, that's work in progress. But good progress. The green is how many extra we've done since the last RTC. So the contractors are out working hard. And the drainage as well, well, it might not seem so as exciting as, say, something like full rebuild, is probably the most important thing from a preventative perspective, as you guys well know. And then I'm aware that you did have Trek coming along to your operations meeting as well, so I won't dwell too much on these to rehash what you would have heard in much greater technical detail than I could ever do from our Richard Bailey. Just to let you know, the procurement for the main work packages, so that's for the super and substructures, is currently on via GETS. That closes very soon, next week on the 4th of June. And that is going nationally due to the types of expertise that is required. But the enabling works are continuing and getting underway, and they are all being undertaken by local contractors. So good progress there. Actually, when I drove up to Waipiro the other night, it was quite different to see it without the old bridge there anymore. Mangahoini Gorge, so you'll be aware here as well, recovery work there has been ongoing since the cyclone, but the consent, thank you, has been granted for the work at Mangahoini Gorge. I think that was just last week that was done, or the week before. Last week, thank you. And so we're now working through those consent conditions with your officers. Property discussions, they are ongoing. There's a few complications, but we've got a great team involved and great involvement from Haku and from the community there. And again, working through a local procurement process for that work. And then I think this is the last one, just a wee update on Kotahi and Nesbitt's Dip. Nesbitt's Dip, we've still got property that we are working through, and I know we're working closely with you as a council on that as well. Consent has been granted, and that will be locally procured too. And then Kotahi, we're still working through with you on the consent for that one, and again, local procurement. So trying our very best to keep the pipeline full for your local contractors. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Yeah, Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. I just had a question about that. I think that's very exciting about the retaining the existing trigger for emergency works.
Yes.
and the same fire rate.
Yes.
And is that just for us, or is that for the whole of New Zealand?
The whole of New Zealand for our standard emergency work.
Sure.
Your cyclone recovery is different for the NIWI funding. You get a bespoke one, which is even higher than your normal emergency works funding.
Yes. And you did warn that it's not going to stay like that. Well, it may not.
May not.
And so the next NLPP, or whatever it's called, might be different. But would it ever be considered our region as something different? You know, with our topography and our uniqueness and our isolation and our land being not as stable as many other parts of the country?
So we will, by nature of the National Land Transport Fund and the amount of pressure that's under, I think we can expect that the board will consider whether it needs to review this process for the 2730. They haven't indicated whether they will or they won't, but you know, I think it's probably appropriate that they have a look at it again, depending on how much funds come through. Would we look to treat any specific region differently? That would be unlikely. We have Wairoa, Northland, West Coast, you know, we have a number of areas with particular challenges, but when we come to the emergency works side of things, one, we have to look at it at a system level and impacts, but the Emergency Works Fund does allow us to, you each have your own individual FAR rate because of some of those complexities, and then get an additional on top. And that's how we allow for some of the differences in both repair contribution as well as other socio-demographic and network constraints.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Great question.
Councillor Telfer.
Yeah, just not due to this paper, but previously we just talked about the variable speed limits around schools, which has got another year before it comes in. But can I just get total clarification? Who actually sets those? Because some schools are 30, some are 40. Can there not be a standard across the country for every school? And who makes that decision? Does NZTA make them if they're on a highway, or does local bodies? I just want clarification around that.
So it's under the remit of each road controlling authority. So you're on your local roads, yes, and the speed limit range that you're able to use outside a school is set in the rule, and again that's to do with how that road is classified and where the school is. So if it's a rural versus an urban would be the simplest way to define it. So we wouldn't just have every school at a 30, for example, if it was on State Highway 3 with nothing else around it. Yeah. So you have control of that, and it's to do with your road type. So your officers will be able to provide some advice on that.
Right. No more questions. Thank you for your report. It's good news on the emergency works. Yeah, something concerning to us, and yeah, I just want to compliment. There was always a area between here and Matawai, uneven surface where you would always launch, where you have visitors, and I'd always mention this area that's been like that for years. And yeah, I noticed last couple times out of town that's been finally fixed. It's sort of something we've had for years, and we always get comment when we get visitors here, so that's great news.
I'll let the team know. Thank you for the feedback.
So that closes our meeting today. I'll just finish with a closing karakia. Kia hora te maranoa, kia whakapapa pu mamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu aroha mai tātou I a tātou katoa. Hui e, tai kia.